Let me start by greeting the delegates to this special occasion organized by PowerGen. I welcome you all and I greet you, bring you greetings from the Nigerian Power Reform Team. I also want to join my colleague to congratulate the PowerGen group for bringing this event into Africa to throw some light into a continent that is struggling with light and to encourage markets to move from one part of Africa to the other. I don't think that's the first slide, if you ask me. I will have to take it back then. Okay. So, by way of introduction, the essence of the keynote address today is to acquaint you with what is going on in Nigeria with respect to power reform. And the outline will be generally talking about the country, our West African markets, power markets relationships, and give you a sense of how we have been on the journey path for reform. Down the line, we would talk about opportunities that this throws up. Let's give a quick sense of what the Nigerian dynamics looks like, the demographics of this country. We have the 7th largest population in the world. We are growing at a very fast pace. And we have more than 40% of our population under 20 years. We have functional literacy and able-bodied, well-trained, technically capable youth waiting to be deployed between the ages of 18 and 45. And we represent effectively the West African market. Over 65% of West African demand can be traced to Nigeria. This graphic gives you a sense of where we are at today and where we ought to be using benchmarks from countries of similar fundamentals as we are. You can see as we speak here, we're the lowest in terms of energy production, even though we're by far the largest in population. That gives you a sense of where we are by way of demand gap. Indonesia, with a comparable population, is doing 120 gigawatts of power. India is 145, Morocco is 190. Comparatively goes up, Brazil takes the leadership there. To achieve where Brazil is today would require us to produce about 135 gigawatts of electricity supply, projected that by 2030, our population will be stretching towards 230 million. If you look at the growth rate from today. This is a huge challenge, and very few countries have been able to do 7 gigawatts of electricity per year just to catch up with demand. Again, here we're talking about how the power pool works, the West African power pool, which is a network of West African countries that are in some kind of convention to share power resources. Nigeria is an executive member of that board, currently the chair of that board. Nigeria has an obligation to wheel 150 megawatts to the pool, which will be shared with neighboring countries. We have current supply obligation to Benin and Togo, and we currently supply all the gas that goes to power the thermal plant in Ghana, with plans to stretch it to Benin and Togo as well. Give a sense of our history as to where we have been. You would see that the history of investment in power has been dismal. Between the years 1988 to somewhere around 2000, my eyes are not doing too well, we have had very bad investments in power, whilst the population was not waiting for us. We've had, and how did this happen? We had a vertically integrated government-owned monopoly entities running the power business. which led to growing inefficiencies and leakages and continued to drain the federal budget. We had uncoordinated development, infrastructure development, so there was regularly a sense of mismatch between generation and transmission, and each one tended to do catch-up on the other. We continue to have suppressed demand, and we continue to have manufacturing concerns that came into Nigeria with a sense that there was a huge market having to exit because they were struggling with the cost of energy. When the power sector reform was initiated, there were two broad objectives. First was to change the way business was being done and to be able to increase the amount of electricity that is available on the grid through the service delivery corridor. There were a lot of plants we have. We probably have a total installed capacity of about 7,000 to 8,000 megawatts of electricity, but a lot of them have degraded over time through not good enough maintenance attention. And so during the reform, we decided to get as much recovery as we can on that window while we move the market away from government ownership and management to private sector ownership. So while we focused on service delivery, we also looked at market reform. The main agenda was actually market reform, which is to move the ownership and management of the assets from government ownership and management to private sector ownership and management. An act had to be put in place, which is what we call the Electricity Power Sector Reform Act in 2005, and that pretty much laid the platform for the rest of the activities in the reform. It's a quick sense of history. Before 2010, our reform is only 2 years old, thereabout. Before May 2010, what we had was just put the law in place. We unbundled the vertically integrated power company, which we call the Power Holding Company of Nigeria. We put the Electricity Regulatory Agency in place, the commission in place, and we also rolled off through the service delivery objective the National Integrated Power Projects Program, which involved over 400 projects cut across generation, transmission, and distribution. At the generation level, there was 5,000 megawatts of electricity had to be built within the timeline of that project, and about 7,000 megawatt equivalent of transmission capacity had to be built through lines and substations. As it would happen, at some point, the reform got stalled through some leadership, if you like, misdirection and confusing signals. But since the arrival of President Goodluck Jonathan, May 2010, a new momentum was bred into the reform process. And since then, a lot of mileages have been recorded. The president fully identified power reform as one of his political planks upon which his performance could be measured. So that brought about very strong political will in the way things were done, and things got done differently. We have a scorecard here which kinds of gives you the milestones. In the previous slide, we developed and launched a Nigerian power reform roadmap, which had milestones in it. And each milestone had to be watched for performance so as we move from point to point. We established a cost-reflective tariff. We established a bulk trader. The bulk trader is an agency created to enable purchase of bulk power from independent power producers through credit enhancement where their risks have been largely covered by government and the World Bank. We have what we call a partial risk guarantee, in such that the shortfalls in invoices by the generating companies will be made whole through the guarantee structure until the distributing companies and the generating companies will be creditworthy enough to transact bilateral contracts. We also put in place NEMCO. NEMCO is an asset liability company of government, because we intended that the new owners of these assets, when sold, should be free of liabilities that were existing before the sale date. So all those liabilities were taken off the balance sheet of the new owner, and is able to structure his finance and do his business. There are other elements of the milestone that we are pretty much struggling with, and we're making progress on it, not so much that we're struggling with it, but there's a momentum that has not been reversed because of the political will. The role of the Presidential Task Force actually is to act as a watchdog over the roadmap, to be sure that all entities associated with the roadmap, be they within the power sector or outside of it, are brought to deliver their own components by way of decisions and actions so that we keep the momentum going. The only red mark on this scorecard actually is talking about energy mix, and the next set of slides will talk to it. We have a predominant gas fuel, we're the predominant gas fuel country, and we've been flaring natural gas for as long as I can remember. So there is a dominant gas fuel model in our energy mix, but we recognize that to be efficient, we need to have other elements of fuel in the mix. Since the beginning of the reform program 2 years ago, there has been significant ramp-up of supply, albeit way behind the demand profile. But this is just to give a sense that things are being done differently. When we took off May 2010, we had a nationwide energy level of under 3,000 megawatts, and we have ramped it up to over 4,300 megawatts delivered on the grid. As I speak with you, we have available energy that can be put on the grid way in excess of 6,000 megawatts. But I had spoken to the misalignment between the different segments. So we do have that power, but we do have constraints as we try to wheel that power into the homes and industries. Now, there we are dealing with, the task force is dealing with that alignment issue by ramping up certain projects that will debottleneck the wheeling grid. We also give a graphic of how daily availability of power in the homes have improved in 10 major cities, just to give a sense of whether there is change or not. This graphic talks largely about how we intend to ramp up generation capability and capacity. On the left side of it, the green talks about projects that we have ongoing. So these are realistic targets, either through the National Integrated Power Project or through the recovery of installed capacities that have derated over the years through poor maintenance. So that is green. The yellow would come through new capacities to be transacted through the IPPs anchored by the bulk trader that I had spoken about earlier on. And then the right graphic talks about our energy mix and our target that by 2020 we should be able to do 40 gig of electricity. It's a tall order, but we believe that when we move the market away from government ownership to private ownership, there is a sense that there will be acceleration because the market fundamentals are very strong. It was proven so with the telcos when the telecom industry was privatized. A lot of the projections made were extremely conservative, and once they moved into the market, there was an acceleration that even surprised them. The next slide generally talks about, again, the kind of sources of energy that we expect to come on the grid by 2013, but it's largely an internal document. The sense we give there is that as we transit the market, we hope that by 2013 December, there will be no government ownership or management of any generation asset, and all the distribution assets would have been completely privatized. The only, the midstream, the transmission assets will be owned by government but managed by an international contractor. In this case, Manitoba of Canada has made the shortlist and have signed the contract and is in place already in the country, working with the Nigerian experts on the ground to change culture and to be able to deliver the best practice on the midstream. We also believe that from the task force, our focus is to make sure that we don't have a megawatt drop while the ownership change from government to private sector, as those kind of transition can sometimes be fraught with surprises. Then this speaks to the kind of opportunities that our agenda throws up to businesses and developers alike. On the generation side, just to give you a sense of what we have, our current assets, thermals is 5.6 gig, hydro is 1.3 gig, wind is just 10 megawatts. Going forward, we have a hydro ongoing project, Mambilo Hydro, that is 2.6 gig in capacity, gigawatts of electricity. Zingori is 0.7. And then we have a lot of pilot studies going on with small and medium hydros, where we have a lot of water body resources around the country that could throw up, support, mostly for embedded, if you like, power that will be left in the location where it is produced, rather than be exported to the higher transmission lines. The new initiatives we have are that we want the new IPPs to come on board between 2014 to 2018 in the first wave of about 2.6 gigawatts of electricity. We're doing feasibility studies on coal. We have MOUs that have been signed by certain businesses, GE, General Electric, Siemens, and Daewoo. And the MOUs are government-to-government understanding that these entities, these businesses will support private developers of power projects in Nigeria through kind or cash equity that enables them to take some leverage of their balance sheet and also brings in best practice, because association with these people will ensure that the businesses are sound in the first place before these people will endorse your project. So it was government policy to work with the governments from where these companies came from and sign up these MOUs, and we're working to realize the impact of that. On fuel to power, we have a lot of gas pipeline infrastructure plans that are on table and presents excellent opportunity for private partnerships. In the area of pipeline gas pipeline development, we are in the process of getting our petroleum industry bill passed in the National Assembly, which enables a lot of private sector participation in the midstream of that sector, such as building pipelines and owning them through concessions and through commercial contracts. We are also doing a lot of gas field development because, like I said, we are largely a gas-dependent country. So we want to make sure that the gas production is ahead of the thermal construction curve. So at any one time, there is no mismatch between gas demanded by thermal plants through the IPP development plan. Transmission is another great opportunity we do have to bring in massive private sector investment. If you look at the 40 gigawatt projection we have by 2020, from about 5,000 gigawatts that we have, 5 gigawatts that we have today, it just gives you a sense of the gap that the midstream must bone up if we really do need to use have an available highway to move between generation and transmission. So clearly there's a very big gap and a great opportunity for transmission kind of investments in Nigeria going forward. We do have support services that will grow in demand as we grow the sector. Personnel, training, if you like, areas like peer reviews, relationship with regulatory agencies at country-to-country level or agency-to-agency level, capacity building, all of that will largely explode as we move our power from where it is to where it should be. The other opportunities are, like had been said earlier on, the EPCs that are capable of building power plants would continuously have interest showing up in Nigeria, and if they have any kind of business arrangements there that looks out for opportunities like this, definitely there will be EPC contracts. There are, of course, OEMs at different levels of the sector, from generation to transmission to distribution, would have OEM opportunities that will be thrown up. Indeed, there will be also opportunities to have minor level assembly plant kind of businesses back in the country, and you will have favorable tax and other incentives because of the employment component that presents. I had spoken about this. This is a breakdown of the MOUs that were signed by General Electric, Siemens AG, Electrobras, Daewoo, the French power firm, and generally the target there is for us to have a G2G, government to government, gives confidence to businesses on both sides to move in and develop projects that benefits both business and promotes government strategic interest. In conclusion, I would say that we have made some significant improvements and achievements as we develop our power sector. We're beginning to impact service delivery, and the market structure is shifting from government ownership to a full market mode. The task force, as Nigel has said, has just been reconstituted in September to give a new momentum and to add the kind of focus that government needs when they embark on a roadmap as serious as the power reform roadmap. I think that this forum qualifies to consider a much more robust philosophy about how to dominate the African power market from an African perspective. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.